Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA stories. In this video, a homeowner association sued me because my fence is supposedly too high, and the HOA president demands he must have access to my pool and property at all times. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is an HOA malicious compliance story. So I'm living with my parents temporarily and came home to my dad bitterly putting on his jacket and boots. He's not the type to express his frustration, so I asked what's going on, and apparently the HOA, who has only sent us a letter once in the 12 years we've lived here, sent one today nitpicking our yard. Our Christmas tree was 3 inches on the sidewalk and was a hazard to pedestrians walking space and didn't align with the tree maintenance code that doesn't allow overgrowth onto streets or sidewalks unless 8 feet tall. This also affected the tree across from the Christmas tree, since that thick branch you can see cut out was 7.8 feet tall over the sidewalk. There were a few other nitpicky things, but the letter at the end was like, "You have a week to fix this or you'll be charged $50 a day until it's fixed." We recently got a new head of the HOA who is gun happy to fix the neighborhood, since the old HOA president was pretty laid back during their last years. The letter was pretty passive-aggressive too, with specific measurements, direct quotes from the code, and a speak about keeping the neighborhood nice. I think my dad was even more mad because he has been working on the yard all week to make it nice for the winter and had just the Christmas tree left. So he told me, well, if they want it done that fast and are going to be hounding me the moment it's overgrown, then I don't want to risk it becoming a problem over the winter. We measured the overhang at 8.3 foot. In his words, it ain't pretty, but it's within code. No expected rebuttal from the HOA, as they haven't sent another letter, and this was 3 weeks ago. My dad's only concern is the tree having a dead patch, but he's been meaning to get different trees since that one is coming close to being as tall as our house and is too much upkeep for him and his full-time job. Plus he's getting a bit older, which makes the outdoor work harder for him now. And the next one is the title story, which is titled HOA sued me because my pool fence is too high. And by the way, if you have watched until here, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even leave a comment, because that would help me tremendously in regards to beating the damn YouTube algorithm. I live in a neighborhood with an HOA, which I already know is a bad start to any story. I did not decide to live in one because I was under the impression it was a good idea, but more because I wanted the house and almost everything here is HOAs at this point. I knew I was gonna deal with spending money and not really seeing much come out of it and needing to follow specific rules, or I was gonna get bothered. I built an in-ground pool in the backyard of my property and around it a 7 feet tall fence. Since it took up the majority of my backyard, it meant that basically the entire backyard was fenced in. When I put up the fence, I knew there was going to be an issue because the HOA maximum fence height allowed is 5 foot tall. I will get more into why I did this below, but be assured there was a reason. I expected a call from the HOA about it and needing to explain why I did it. Instead, I had the president coming to my house after noticing the fence and having a conversation that made me less than comfortable. HOA, you cannot have a fence that tall up. Get rid of it right now. Me, I cannot actually take it down. The reason it's so tall is… The HOA guy cut me off and said, "Excuse me, but you don't make the rules here. I do. I need you to take that fence down so I'm able to inspect your property." Me, wait, what? You cannot just go in my property and inspect it. HOA, of course I can. I'm the HOA president, and that means I have the right to inspect properties and make sure that everything else is in compliance with our rules. At this point, I kind of forgot that this started about the fence, because now I was just feeling violated. Had this guy been wandering on my property without me knowing the entire time I was living here? He could have easily spied on me through a window. I felt creeped out. Me, no, you cannot actually. Unless you have proper cause, a warrant and police, you cannot just come onto my property. I own it. HOA, yes I can. Now take down your fence so I can inspect your property. If you have nothing to hide, then you shouldn't be arguing about this. The old "if you have nothing to hide" comment. I don't have anything to hide, but I do have a right to my own privacy that I won't give up. I used some choice words that I don't want to repeat here to tell him to shove it, and I was not taking down the fence. And if I saw him on my property again, I would call the police and have him arrested for trespassing. He told me that he was gonna file a lawsuit against me for violating the HOA rules with my fence, also claiming that he had the right to inspect any property that he wanted. I told him to knock himself out if he wanted to sue me. I got a lawyer of my own, and I still had information that he clearly did not know because he didn't want to let me get a word out. My fence might look against the rules to him, but he was in for a shock. His lawyer clearly did not let him in on anything either, which makes me think that he left out some details. Just saying that I was supposedly building an illegal high fence and probably lying that he knew I was doing something wrong where he couldn't see. In court was when I learned exactly how stupid this HOA president was, because he tried to tell the judge that he was wrong. When the judge heard and tried to explain to him that the HOA doesn't have rights to inspect and enter property without the homeowner's permission, he got mad. He told the judge that he didn't know HOA laws and that if it was written in the guidelines, then it was valid, not caring or even listening that it was against the law. By the way, one way to screw yourself in court is to tell the judge that he doesn't know what he's talking about. After that bit of drama passed, it finally came down to talking about my fence, with him claiming that the HOA had the right to dictate fence height maximums, which it technically does. That was when my lawyer dropped the information that I tried to tell him from the beginning. Since the purpose of my fence was to surround a pool, I was not only allowed to have it be 7 foot tall, but required by law. County, state and federal law all supersede anything the HOA says. They can make their guidelines stricter, but cannot have a guideline that actually goes against the law. My county had an ordinance created years before I built my pool regarding safety. There had been too many instances of people falling into pools, jumping fences into pools and getting hurt, etc. One way to combat this was to require a 7 foot tall fence, making it much harder for a person to get over and into the pool to hurt themselves. When the HOA president heard this, he was furious with me. He argued that I should have disclosed that information to him before we had to get into court, saying that you cannot hide evidence from the opposite side. This guy watches too much TV because there is no evidence, just facts. Facts that he could and should have found out on his own before entering the court. With his own lawyer admitting that he was unaware of everything, the HOA was forced to pay for my legal fees as part of the court settlement, as well as the fact that I was able to keep my fence, with the judge giving him another warning that if he enters people's properties, he can be arrested. I think the court or that judge may have had something to do with the next update to the HOA rules, being that no HOA member can enter a homeowner's property without being invited. I found out that this really had nothing to do with offense or wanting to sneak onto my property. He just picked a fight with me specifically because of something that I did not even remember. So it turned out that he had been angry at me for 2 years because of an argument I got into with him one time. I left an old couch to be taken by the garbage man. He argued that was not allowed and they would not take it. And when they didn't, he could fine me for having my furniture outside on my lawn. Well, they actually did take it, and when he tried to fine me anyway, I refused to pay. It turned out he held onto that grudge the entire time while I forgot it even existed. He had been waiting for a reason to start a fight with me, not thinking before jumping into it and deciding it was a smart idea. If his emotions were not so high and wanted to get back at me, he might have listened and avoided the entire thing. Instead, he just finally lost his position in the HOA because nobody can stand him. And the next one is titled, "Neighbor was rubbing my pregnant wife's belly." So my wife is 8 months pregnant with our child. We live next door to another married couple who are in their late 30s. I don't like the guy. I found him to be invasive and the weird type of friendly that almost seems to be prying and clingy. I'm not sure if that's clouding my judgment here or if this has validated my beliefs about him. I left for work and decided on the way there that I just wasn't feeling it and called off. I stopped for breakfast before heading home to surprise my wife. 40 minutes tops. So I get home, enter from the back door, and here's my wife and my neighbor sitting in our living room on the couch. She is turned towards him, fully clothed but with her shirt pulled up over her very pregnant stomach, while he, facing her, is rubbing lotion on her stomach with both hands. They actually both froze before my wife asked how come I was back, and then said his name, aka neighbor's name, stopped by to borrow the toolbox while I was moisturizing and wanted to know if he could feel the baby, so I said it was okay. And by the way, Ripe Stars, I just need to quickly interject here. That sounds like the crappy plot to an adult movie. Don't you agree? Would you have been okay with this if you would have been the guy in this story? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, I told him to get out before I put him out and he left immediately. I tried to stay calm and talk to her and get the whole story. So apparently the neighbor's wife is infertile. First I heard of it, which is amazing considering the guy never shuts up about his personal woes, and he wanted to feel the baby. That's her story and she is sticking to it. That's not good enough for me though. My thought process is there's a big effing difference between feeding a baby for 10 seconds and coming into our home and rubbing lotion on my wife's stomach. If it was some close friend of ours, I might understand, but I dislike this guy, and my wife has never expressed any sort of closeness to him, aside from passing pleasantries, and she's not the type to let anyone she isn't close to put their hands on her. So in the span on a day, the guy goes from being a distant acquaintance of hers at best to her deciding to invite him in and let him rub her. I also find it convenient that he showed up that early, right after I went to work, very shortly after his own wife also left for work. And he has never came over asking to borrow anything of mine before, yet 9:30ish in the morning and he urgently needs a toolbox. I don't believe my wife. This is the first time my trust in her has not been strong enough. I don't believe her story because it makes no sense. When I told her I'd be mentioning this to his wife, she was adamant that I don't, as not to make more of it than it is. If it was innocent, what more is there to make? And even if nothing more is going on, I'm not okay with what I've seen. I'm not okay with him rubbing my unborn child in my home without me there. I know it's her body and her choice, but I'm not okay with this. It would be one thing to feel the baby kick, but he was sitting reclined comfortably on our sofa, rubbing lotion on her with both leaned into their private conversation. I'm trying really hard to figure out how to express the fact that I don't believe her story without causing stress that'd be dangerous for her or our baby. I don't want to pick a fight with her at this stage of her pregnancy, but at the same time my mind is spinning and I'm not cool with what happened. Any advice would be appreciated. Update to the story: this will be my only update and I'm only posting it due to the amount of support I've gotten as well as the numerous requests to do so. I didn't expect the response I got, so I'm choosing to confront it. Most of you were right, congratulations. So my wife stuck to her story, apologized for making me uncomfortable and assured me it wouldn't happen again. Neighbor decided to leave a handwritten note in the mailbox specifically apologizing as well. I still didn't feel better and the consensus was that I should speak to my neighbor's wife, who we are gonna call Sally, so that's what I did. Watched my neighbor leave for work and then called my mother-in-law to come take my wife for a lunch and a girls' date so she could get out of the house. I left as usual for work, called off again and went to stay with a friend. Got a text from my wife around noon telling me she was with mother-in-law and would be back by dinner. Went home and knocked on Sally's door. Neighbor decided to tell Sally. I kicked him out and caused a scene about not wanting either of them speaking to us anymore because I was pissed about him helping my wife. So I come to find out that both Sally and the neighbor have been going over to my house while I was away busy for the past few weeks, as my wife had approached her and asked if they'd be willing to lend a hand with chores she could do no longer alone. Sometimes Sally went over and did small tasks or just hung out, and sometimes both, sometimes just the neighbor. My wife told her that I knew and was fine with it, and that's why she was confused when her husband told her that his BS about me being mad. She showed me where she texted my wife, has her number, not mine, to clarify and ask if she was welcome over, and my wife has not replied, and since I don't often see Sally or socialize with them, she just assumed her husband was telling the truth. She also admitted that she noticed neighbor and my wife becoming fast friends and figured it was due to the pregnancy, but thought it was his way of dealing with their own inability to have kids, so she just wrote it off. I told her what I walked in on. I told her about the tools, which ended up being BS too, came to the same conclusions, both cried, both hugged for the first time, both took turns denying and accepting and talking each other down. Took a walk around the block together and conspired. She planned to call neighbor, aka her husband, at work and say that my wife messaged her, confessing to the two of them having an affair and seeing what happened. So I went back to my friends. Started having major panic attacks thinking I screwed up, I was about to ruin my marriage, worrying I might be wrong. A bit later and I get a call from my wife screaming at me to find a way to leave work and come home. So I go home and the neighbor called her telling her what Sally told him. She told me I was crazy, I was a piece of crap and that she was considering leaving me, everything. Having a panic attack thinking I just ruined my entire life over nothing, while also trying to calm her down for the baby's sake. Impulsively told her that if she was leaving, I would still be requesting a DNA test. And that is when it all came down. The entire tone changed, pleading, begging, apologizing, hyperventilating, holding me, asking me how I found out while denying anything happened. I told her it'd be okay and asked if she'd talk to me if we went for a drive. And she agreed. I took us to a parking lot and we talked and told her if there was any chance of anything happening, she needed to tell me what was happening because I already knew a lot. She had screwed the neighbor a handful of times before she was pregnant. Our baby might not be ours. Neighbor had been coming by and doing daddy duties once in a blue moon in case it is his. They have not slept together in months. She said we could move away, that it's ours no matter what, that he had manipulated her. And then she admitted she lied to Sally to justify the neighbor going over for daddy duties. I asked her if she would stay with mother-in-law for a few days while I calmed down. She agreed, took her home, packed up some stuff and dropped her off. I've cleaned out my essentials and I'm in a friend's basement. Friend called her on my behalf and told her that if the baby is mine, I'll be dealing with it. If it isn't, it's on her, but either way, I'll be filing for divorce. My friends took my phone from me and deleted my social media. She's been calling my friends. Friends told her to F off. I spoke to my boss and he's been very understanding. Last I heard from Sally, neighbor had not been home and stopped responding to her calls and texts. I have nothing left. In less than a week, my life has fallen apart. The only thing keeping me here is the small chance that the baby is mine. I have nothing else though. I woke up today disappointed that I woke up at all. I have never felt this alone and I have not accepted any of it yet. I'm praying for the first time in my life that I can stop feeling this way and find some strength. Update to the story, I'm still getting messages on a regular basis for an update, so this is the final one. So basically, extremely long story made slightly less long. A week after my last update, my soon-to-be ex-wife had our child, which I was at the hospital for. I'm actually the father. The first few weeks after my last update were extremely difficult, with family and friends on both sides adding to the drama. Thankfully, I've had an overwhelming amount of support from not only the vast majority of people I know in my personal life, but from all of you as well. My wife and I agreed to sit down and discuss things after she was discharged in my friend's basement with my friend upstairs in case I needed the support. She came over and we basically said everything we needed to say. I exploded and said a lot of mean stuff, most of which I regret, some I don't. She spent the whole time apologizing and begging me to take her back and give our family a chance to survive everything that happened. Went on for about an hour like this until I accepted there was nothing left to say and I have zero romantic love for her anymore, and she accepted that we need to focus on our daughter above all else. We are agreeing to figure out a custody split amicably and to eventually co-parent more actively together when wounds heal, but our marriage is over. She has the potential to be a wonderful mom, but she failed me as a wife, and my sole focus right now is how to get myself mentally to where I need to be the best father possible. We plan to eventually sell the home, but right now I'm staying in an apartment. Sally is leaving her husband, aka the neighbor. He is apparently staying with his mom and still refused to speak to Sally directly. According to her, the last thing that was passed along to her is that he understands what he did, he is sorry that he hurt her, he loves her and won't contest a divorce. She is struggling to handle everything and lacks a support system, so we are developing a friendship, mostly two wounded people leaning on each other, and I'm doing my best. She plans to start therapy too, and no, I don't plan to be anything more than platonic friends with Sally. Lovely woman, but no. I still have not fully processed my new role as a parent. I think mentally I already convinced myself that my child would not be mine in case it ended up that way. I plan to take classes and spend more time with my daughter doing early bonding, and actually I'm terrified but also very happy. I know there's a lot left to do and a lot of hurting left to go through, but I'm stable and a dad. That is what matters most. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. This is actually a story that happened to my aunt's family, and I got to hear all about it because they were staying with us for a little while during the whole thing. There was a pretty bad hurricane about 5 years ago where she lived, and they even recommended people to evacuate and stuff. Luckily, it kind of moved and mostly ended up going into the ocean. Damages were still crazy though, and I think some places did not even have power restored for a few weeks. My aunt's house did end up damaged and got totally messed up. The entire first floor was flooded and the floors were just horrible. Windows got destroyed and I think some other stuff I don't fully remember. They belong to the HOA, which is not uncommon here, but it was the first time I heard somebody I personally knew complaining about them. So with all the damage, they needed to get the entire house renovated in order to be livable again. We live about an hour away from them, and with one sibling in college and the other recently moved out, we had plenty of space. My cousins and I were all teenagers and got along, so it was a little fun for us to hang out. I heard a lot of what was going on by listening to my aunt and mom talk. I found out years later, but this was the gist of what was going on while they tried to repair the house. So they had hired a contractor and were in the process of getting things fixed. The HOA was trying to halt the construction, claiming that my aunt did not get permission and needed to go through the HOA channels if they wanted to make a home renovation. This was a long process where the HOA could basically just tell them no and not give them a permit in order to do the work. With them being an hour away, the HOA took advantage to constantly slow down the contractors from finishing the work. It did get done though, and about a month later they moved out of our house and back into their new one. This meant I no longer got to hear much of the gossip, but I was curious and asked my mom a couple years later what ended up happening with the whole HOA thing and getting the rest of the story. She told me that after the house was done and they moved back in, the HOA filed a lawsuit against my aunt for over $200,000. Claiming that she didn't get their approval and did things to her home that went against the HOA-approved things. For those wondering why she didn't follow HOA guidelines when it came to what to put in her house, it was because they were totally outdated. The brand of windows, for example, that was HOA approved was not even being made anymore, so there was no way to get it. By their logic, if you wanted windows, you needed to take them off an old house or just not have any, I guess. The lawsuit was horrible and I didn't know how they could do something like that. My mom explained that while it was about the house, it was actually more than that and they wanted my aunt to simply move out. Now might be a good time to explain that she was a single mom and left her husband many years before. Nobody knows what happened to him, but none of us cared because he was just a bad person and the whole family was glad that she left him. The HOA saw a single mother as being a bad look for the area and wanted her to get out so a more traditional kind of family could move in instead. This was their way to try and legally get her out. With the lawsuit, it didn't seem great since technically she did violate HOA rules by renovating her house without permission. So she had to get a lawyer to dig pretty deep until he found that there was an exception. When damages are caused by a natural disaster, in other words the hurricane, then an HOA approval can be overlooked in order to speed up the process to make the home livable. In basic terms, I guess that meant since the damage was caused by the storm, she did not need to follow the HOA rules and could do whatever she wanted as far as repairing the house. When this was brought up, the HOA was trying to claim that she made changes for things that were not actually damaged and trying to use the law she did not even know existed until afterwards as an excuse to bypass them. My aunt was great at keeping records and was able to prove that the only work done was for the damage. Still, the HOA wanted to push forward with the lawsuit, claiming that they were going to have a judge force her out of the house. Instead though, my aunt filed for the court to review the HOA laws and if they were actually within the real law. Specifically the ones regarding home renovations. It turns out that the HOA had spent years doing things the wrong way and the court was not happy about it. They were not allowed to actually have a say in if a renovation could happen or not. What they could do was open it up at a meeting, and if a certain number of neighbors objected, it could be questioned. They also did not have the right to say what brands of things to use or even what companies could be used. The entire thing was a mess. So my aunt ended up not needing to pay or leave, which made the HOA furious with her. They were in enough hot water and I was so excited to find out what happened with them. I must have been reading too many stories because I was expecting them going to jail or losing their house or something. But well, in reality the HOA was under the investigation for a while and the rules had to be reworked. My mom also mentioned that the entire HOA management changed because of all of this. I'm just happy that they were able to stay in their house despite the people with the old school mentality thinking that they didn't belong here. Hell, I think one of my cousins single-handedly raised the test scores at the local school. You would think the family would have been wanted there even if it was a single-parent household. From the whole thing I learned two important lessons that I want to carry with me as I move into my life and hopefully get a house one day. The first is to get insurance so that if something happens to the house, it can be covered. The second is that if I can avoid living in an HOA, I should take that opportunity because there is a chance it can be trouble for me down the road. However, I forgot to mention, the HOA also had to pay a fine of $30,000 to my aunt's family. However, in the grand scheme of things, this was not a big deal financially for any party involved. I'm glad that the management at least changed, and so far, it seems like the new HOA management is much nicer and there are no more issues. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.